Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Welcome. Whether you're new to the show or an old friend, I'm so glad you could join us. Mission Evolution is the place to find the latest evolutionary knowledge from today's leading experts. This hour, we'll delve into the concept of alien abduction or spiritual transformation. Most everyone has heard of alien abduction, but what exactly is it? Has it been proven? What's its purpose? Are these purported abductions actual physical events or esoteric ones? With us this hour to consider these questions is Kathleen Marden. Kathleen is the niece of ET contact experiencers Betty and Barney Hill, an award-winning researcher and author. She's widely considered one of the largest leading UFO contact researchers of our time. Since 1990, Kathleen has researched and experienced the perplexing nature of UFOs and human contact with non-human entities. Kathleen is a recipient of the 2021 International UFO Congress Lifetime Achievement Award. She's worked on 3 comprehensive studies on nearly 5,000 experiencers. Kathleen has 6 books. Her latest, Forbidden Knowledge, a personal journey from alien abduction to spiritual transformation. Her website, kathleen-marden.com. Kathleen, thank you for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
It's a real pleasure. So let's start out. It's very, very intriguing. Your bio says that your aunt and uncle was Betty and Barney Hill. Would you mind telling us a little bit about their experience?
Yes, absolutely. I was 13 years old in 1961 when they had their experience. I had been to Niagara Falls a month or 2 before this, and when I returned home, I had photographs, met with Betty and Barney. They came to visit about at least once a week, and I was so excited about the trip. Barney turned to Betty and said, "Do you think you might like to go there sometime?" And she said yes. So he hatched a secret plan to take her on a trip to Niagara Falls and on to Montreal during her week-long vacation from her job as a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. So he surprised her in mid-September and they went on the trip, but they had an unexpected event on their trip home. They were driving through upstate New Hampshire. They lived on the seacoast, and they were driving during the nighttime, anticipating that their arrival would be about 2 o'clock in the morning. So they started to see a craft that seemed to have an interest in them. And this craft was moving in closer and closer. It was silent. It would hover. It would bounce back and forth in the air like a ping pong ball. And it had multicolored lights. So it appeared to be rotating at one point. And then as they were driving south of Franconia Notch on Route 3 in Lincoln, New Hampshire, this craft surged ahead. And Betty and Barney had to stop the vehicle right in the middle of the road so that they wouldn't be directly underneath it. It descended to about 100 feet above their car. Barney jumped out with the binoculars and held them to his eyes. He was attempting to see if anything was inside that craft. He and Betty could see a bright, brilliant blue-white light shining through. And he stepped away from his car. And when he did, the craft shifted to an adjacent field to the east of where he was standing. He walked to the edge of the field, holding the binoculars up to his eyes. He was a skeptic. He did not believe that this was possible. He hoped that he would be able to identify it as something unconventional. But when he looked up at it, he saw what he said, quote, were entities or figures that were somehow not human, close quote. They would dress.
So how did he see them? I mean, was the vehicle still closed up? Were there windows? How did he see them?
There was a row of windows encircling the front of this dish-shaped craft, and they were standing behind the windows. Suddenly, all but one of them moved to what appeared to be a panel on the back of this sort of hallway, and he could see their arms go up. He could now see them from the tops of their heads down to their knees. When their arms went up into the air, little fin-like structures started to slide out from the craft, and something started to drop down from the bottom of the craft. He didn't know what it is, but as an investigator myself for the past 32 years, I know that that is sort of a carrier beam. It looks like a deep blue light, and it carries people onto the craft. But for Barney, he was looking into the face of that one who was standing at the window, and he became terrified that there was a plan, and this plan was to capture him like, quote, a bug in a net, close quote. This is when he tore the binoculars away from his eyes so violently that he broke the leather strap, and he ran back to the car screaming to Betty that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. He ran to the car, closed the door, but before he did, he noticed that the craft was heading in his direction. He told Betty to roll down the window as he went speeding down the highway. She rolled it down. She looked up. She was expecting to see lights. All she saw was darkness, even though it was a bright light night. And within moments, she and Barney heard a series of code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of their car. It caused the car to vibrate and a tingling sensation to pass through their bodies. The next thing they knew, they were about 35 miles down the highway. They heard a second series of buzzing sounds, but they didn't see a craft at this time. They had vague memories of a fiery orb that seemed to be sitting on the ground, finding themselves on a dirt road with tall trees all around and a roadblock. But that was all they had of that conscious recall to this point. They didn't know that they had been abducted. And when they arrived home, they discovered physical evidence that was very troubling to them. They made a report to the Air Force, Project Blue Book, and they made a report to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena.
What kind of physical evidence did they find?
Yes, Betty's dress was torn in several places. The top of her zipper that ran down the back of her dress was torn, and the thick zipper fabric, and also the stitching along the zipper. Also, the hem was torn down, and the lining was torn from waist to hemline. In addition to this, Barney's best dress shoes were so deeply scraped on the tops that he had to purchase new shoes. The watches that they had been wearing that night never ran again. And on the trunk of their vehicle, there were several shiny spots, all about the size of quarters or a little bit larger. And when a physicist told Betty to place a compass over those spots, the compass needle whirled, indicating that there was a magnetic field that shouldn't have been there in that area. And that area was precisely where they heard those buzzing tones the night before.
Wow. So how did now you've become a UFO contact researcher and have been for years. How did this experience, I take it they shared it with you, obviously. How did this influence your choice in going in that direction?
Well, Betty and Barney shared this with me only 2 days after the event. When I arrived home as a 13-year-old girl, arriving home from school, my mother was on the phone with Betty, and I overheard that part of the conversation and couldn't wait to drive with my parents the 20 miles to their home. So they had a huge influence on me, and I immediately became interested in astronomy. And I didn't become an astronomer professionally, but I was able to watch the aftermath of this, to meet almost all of the scientists who were involved in the investigation. Theirs was the first scientifically investigated case of UFO abduction in the United States. Most of us don't call it abduction any longer. And I'll call it contact or visitation. And so I became extraordinarily interested. In 1963, Betty and Barney had their first interview with Dr. Benjamin Simon. Barney had developed bleeding ulcers, and he was hospitalized for this. It was life-threatening, and this experience was so deeply troubling that I became interested in human psychology.
I can certainly see how you would. So you have quite a impressive history of researching, your bio mentioned. Um, have you personally found solid evidence that you can hang your hat on that this is a physical event, that these not just Betty and Barney, but UFO contact? Do you have evidence that has it ever been proven?
I have investigated thousands of cases, and Betty's and Barney's has the most evidence. And I say that we have to rely on the weight of the evidence, just as we could in a court of law. Of course, there is evidence that can be investigated and analyzed in scientific laboratories. Betty's dress has been. And most recently, scientists at a university have discovered rare and expensive metals with a very high melting point on Betty's dress.
Oh,
Over my
interesting.
years of investigation, we have discovered patterns on people's bodies. These are marks on people's bodies that we don't publish or publicize, but we see these same marks on experiencers' bodies around the world.
Now, what kind of marks are these? Are these like bruises or tattoos, or what kind of marks are they?
There are a few tattoos. There are bruises, patterned bruises, not just a scratch or two or something that a person might be able to do on their own. Also, implants have been removed and studied by Dr. Roger Lear, who is now deceased. But some of these implants have very special properties. They have an abundance, they're connected to proprioceptor nerves, nerve fibers. Instead of just being in the body. The body does not reject them. There's a thick coating surrounding them. They are of a crystalline structure far beyond our level of technological development in nanotechnology. And there were a couple that could transmit into deep space.
Wow.
They also found
we're going to have to leave this. We're going to have to leave this that's okay. We're going to have to leave this as a bit of a cliffhanger because it is time for a station break. Kathleen and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Hello again. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us this hour discussing alien abduction is Kathleen Marden. Her website, kathleen-marden.com. Kathleen, we were on a cliffhanger about the physical evidence that has been found and recorded by some of your studies and scientific studies, I understand. Do these people have something in common? I mean, what there's a lot of people on the planet. What dictates who gets snatched and who doesn't?
Well, in our studies of about 5,000 experiencers of contact, we were able to determine that the majority are taken along genetic lines. So there
Oh,
is a genetic
interesting.
component to this. Also, experiencers of contact have certain commonalities, and those commonalities are very similar to near-death experiencers. So Kenneth Ring and Christopher Rosing from the University of Connecticut did a study on experiencers of contact and near-death experiencers. And we also repeated that study, and we discovered that they have a different view of the world after they have these experiences, that they are more benevolent humans. They're not as interested in material wealth or fame or anything like that. They're more interested in helping other humans and helping
Interesting.
our earthlings to progress.
Well,
All
it would seem that both experiences would literally blow a person's reality apart.
Absolutely.
And in
Absolutely.
initiatory things for shaman and people that are going to be of service and access different realms, that's one of the prerequisites of these very difficult initiations that shatter their reality. So I can understand that. But also, isn't there, how do we know it's not a genetic predisposition to schizophrenia or something?
Well, we had ways of determining uh, in one of our studies the mental functioning of the people who were involved. We had a professor of psychology who administered a test, the American Personality Inventory, to experiencers to determine just who they were and how they were doing. And, we are familiar with the characteristics of schizophrenia. I have a background. My first profession was in psychiatric social work. So I have a background in that. And we had others who did as well. And the evidence really speaks for itself. We had ways of eliminating those who were hoaxers, eliminating those who were wannabes, people who knew a lot about uh, ET contact, but and really wanted to be part of that group, but simply were not. They didn't have the other secret characteristics. So this was very important to us to identify who the real experiencers of contact were.
Now, Kathleen, let's back up a little bit. You keep mentioning we. Who's we? Who are you talking about?
Well, this study that we did was with the Mutual UFO Network's direct experiencer research team. And I was the director of that team for 10 years, from 2011 to 2021. So we had, for example, Dr. Michael Austin Melton on our team, and he has a doctorate and he is a psychotherapist. And as I mentioned before, Dr. Don C. Donderi from McGill University. And then we had other people on the team who had worked in social research and people who are experiencers. And we were very, very careful in writing the questionnaire, the survey that we wrote, and in the way we went about abstracting our findings.
Well, now you mentioned that just like near-death experience, there's people that have had experienced contact with the non-human entities, have a drastic change from who they were before to who they are after. Is there kind of some earmarking trauma as well, PTSD? I mean, is there something that goes on there as well that could destabilize these people?
Absolutely. Even when they later find that their experiences were positive, generally they begin with shock, with anxiety related to what occurred, um, particularly nowadays when so many people know a great deal about this and are led to believe that they're all being taken to craft and that they are nothing more than lab rats, which is not true, but it is being characterized that way. So, yes, some people do experience trauma and they have to work through that trauma. And I always recommend that they do this before an investigation begins.
Is there something kind of earmarked that you've come after talking to 5,000 plus of these people? Is there something that you start to recognize as the PTSD signs that these people kind of need some more help?
Yes, they might be shaking, they might be crying or
Mhm.
trembling when they first speak. Oftentimes, people trust me. They trust me because of who I am. So they're willing to open up to me and they know that I'm not going to violate confidentiality. And so I do my best to hold them in the highest respect and with regard to their emotional state, and to be gentle and supportive and understanding. So I just tell people, take your time. I know what you're going through. I've had this experience myself, and uh, it can be traumatic. And it's really important to work through this. And we can talk about it. I can do what I can to help you. And so we will talk for an hour or so.
Mhm.
And oftentimes people say, I feel like a different person. I feel so much better. But then there are others who need, maybe they've had past traumas and they need to be referred to a psychotherapist that they can reach out to for a private for pay um, sessions and
Do you have
conversations with
I'm sorry.
them.
Do you have a referral base that you use so you wouldn't want to just refer them to just anybody that thinks they're schizophrenic because they've had the experience, right?
No, no,
So
no.
so do you have a referral base of people that are experienced in working with this?
Yes, we do. We compiled this and continue to compile it through the Mutual UFO Network. And experiencers can contact MUFON's Experiencer Resource Team, is what it's called now, for this list. I also have a list myself. These people are vetted, insured professionals.
Fantastic. So we need to back up one more time because you said that this travels very often. The likelihood of being abducted runs genetically, and then you kind of mentioned that you had an experience yourself. Would you mind sharing some of that with us?
No, not at all. I thought that I would never reveal this, but in recent years, I have disclosed that I am an experiencer. And the reason I did it is that I was told that it would help thousands of people around the world. So I said, okay, I have nothing to lose at this point in my life. And I disclosed that when I was 17 years old, my aunt Betty Hill was working with a team of scientists in what was then called a psychophysics experiment. They call it a CE5 today. They were giving her a script to read where they would want to have a UFO come in to show itself to them, hopefully to land and to share a piece of hardware. So Betty was doing this experiment. She was attempting to call a craft in to land on my grandparents' farm. And I grew up across the street from my grandparents. And in April of 1966, a craft did come in. It was observed by 2 people, and it left physical trace evidence. It was investigated, but what we didn't disclose at that time is that my mother and I remembered being on that craft that night. It was terrifying to me, and I tried to suppress it. I tried to deny it. I thought of any reason that I could possibly learn from skeptics about what else it might have been. But in the long run, there was no way that I could deny that this had occurred.
So, and it brings me to the question that we have. Are these physical experiences or are these spiritual experiences or both?
These are sometimes physical and sometimes spiritual. I know that I was in physical contact with these entities. I felt the table underneath me. I felt myself standing up on the craft. I was being escorted by a kind gray entity who was giving me information. There were people who observed these physical craft who looked for me, and I was missing in one of these experiences. In another experience, when I knew I was missing, others observed the craft. So there is a physical component where they can come into our environment. At the same time, I believe we all are from a multi-dimensional universe, and that these are spiritual beings who have physical bodies. They claim that they live on other planets in our galactic neighborhood. Some claim to live in a different galaxy. But, as during my studies, dating back to 1954, these ETs who claim to be from a galactic federation have stated where they were from, and they're telling different stories at different times. In fact, I had the opportunity to ask directly, and what I was told is that they no longer live on these planets. They rarely go there. They are mostly living on very large ships close to our planet, and that they are from other dimensions, 5th and 6th dimensional entities. That's who I talked to. And also there was a 9th dimensional entity who no longer has a physical body. They said they were a protective force of the universe, and that they were in charge of our quadrant of the galaxy.
So we're about out of time in this segment, but are there different varieties that are performing this function of being guardians, if you will, like different races?
Yes, there are. There are many different races. If we have time, I'll tell you.
Well, you can get started and we can pick up on the other side of the
Okay.
break if we need to.
Well, there are grays. There are avian types, tall whites, tall goldens. There are insectoid types, human-looking types, and the only type that I can't think of belonging to any galactic federation is a reptilian type.
They do have the bad rap, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Well, it is that magic moment that we'll need to take a station break. Kathleen and I will be right back to continue this fascinating discussion. So you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Hi there. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Our guest this hour is UFO contact researcher Kathleen Marden. We're discussing an alien abduction as it relates to spiritual transformation. Her website, kathleen-marden.com. Kathleen, speaking of which, you say that there's two things I'd like to put together here. One is that it travels in family lines. Why do you think that is, and how do you think they track these family lines?
When I asked them about this, they told me that they like the proximity of the genetic line so that they can look for positive changes across generations, that they are attempting to upgrade the human DNA. They said that initially they took many people at random, people who were driving down the road, fishing, children who were playing on the backlands of the family farm. And then when they found what they were looking for, they began their genetic experiments. So that's what they told me.
You say they told you. Who told you that?
Some of that information was given to me directly, telepathically, when I was on craft on a table. And some of it was given to me by a council of 8 entities that I had the opportunity to do an experiment with over a 2-year period.
How'd you do that? How'd you keep contacting them to do the experiment over 2 years?
Well, I met a man named Kevin Briggs, who was originally from the UK. He was a police officer there, and he moved to the United States about 20 years ago. And I was introduced to him after a conference that I spoke at, and we met for lunch. The 2 other researchers and myself, we continued to meet with Kevin to hear about his contact experiences. And I even hypnotized him at one point. But eventually, one of the people who was a researcher in our group, Dr. Melanie Barton Bragg, was talking with us at my home. Kevin was there, and she noticed, and Denise Stoner, the other researcher, noticed that Kevin appeared to be channeling information. Now, he had never channeled before, but Melanie worked with him using meditation, and he learned to communicate with these non-humans. And then he invited us to take part in this experiment. For 1 year, we met one Saturday a month, and we each took questions. We also took our investigative equipment in order to attempt to find evidence that this was really occurring, and we were able to record evidence as well. So we were pleased with that.
So what evidence did you record? I mean, how could you tell he was channeling and who he was channeling? That's always the problem with channeling. We might be channeling, but who are we talking to?
I know, it absolutely is difficult. So the first thing that we did is that we took a laser thermometer. And Denise Stoner is a paranormal investigator. And so what we wanted to do is record the temperature of the room beforehand, and then the temperature of the room when these entities came in, and Kevin set aside his consciousness and permitted them to use his vocal cords. So she used the laser thermometer, and we were able to record as much as a 10-degree increase in the area of the room around Kevin's body, which was
Fahrenheit or
quite
Celsius?
significant.
Fahrenheit or Celsius, 10 degrees.
Fahrenheit.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
we
that's
were
pretty impressive.
We also experienced strong tingling sensations in our bodies. We didn't know that each of us was experiencing that when it happened. Then,
So,
go ahead.
Well, I'm going to say, so far, we've established that there's something going on, but we still haven't established who we're talking to. So continue.
That was the most difficult part of it. They said that they would show each of us a craft, and they did. They also showed me about a 35-foot circle of water whirling in my lake. And I'd
Okay,
never
help me
seen
out
that
here.
before.
Are we experiencing this in the room at the same time, or are these things that happened then afterward?
That was afterwards.
Okay, so they said they were going to
Yes.
give you signs, and then in your ordinary life, after the episode with the 10-degree temperature drop, then you experienced some of the things they said they were going to show you.
Yes, sometimes individually and sometimes together. We also learned to meet with these individual entities and to have them speak with us telepathically, answering our questions individually. The only thing that I have not been able to do is to observe them on a craft, to know that they are actually who they say they are. I believe that they're non-humans. I don't believe that these are deceased humans having fun with us because of the scientific nature of the questions that they answered.
So the it still remains to be seen who you're really talking to. Yes, and
Yes.
when you're talking about telepathically, how does that come across? Is it like in your mind's ear? Is it in your imagination? How are you getting this information? How are you getting the intel?
When this happens, I feel a strong tingling through my crown chakra that moves through my entire body. And then I have thoughts that are not my own. I know that they're there. And then I will focus, I meditate, and I focus on my question. And then I receive the answer and I know that it's not my thoughts giving me the answer. And it comes very rapidly.
You've heard of the unified field, and that we've had contact with spiritual entities through the unified field for thousands of years. How does this
Yes.
relate?
This is very perplexing and challenging to me because for many years I was a nuts and bolts investigator. I didn't go beyond that. And then experiencers started to be healed by these ETs when they requested healing. In fact, I requested healing and received it.
Oh, tell us a little bit about that. Now you've got me intrigued.
Yes, it was 2012, and I was working on my first of 3 studies on experiencers. This was with 50 experiencers, and we had a 25-person control group, members of the general public. And one of these experiencers was a man from Australia. And so I was interviewing him. And at that time, I was thinking that these ETs were all bad. And he was telling me they're not, they will heal people. And would you like to speak with one? So I felt a little odd about this, but I said yes. And we met via Skype. And he was channeling these ETs. Now, how would I know if he was faking this, if he was some kind of a fraud or what? So I wanted to know more. I asked many questions. And then eventually in one of our meetings, I said, I have had a debilitating illness for many years. And I'm an author. I write these books. But when I travel, I become very ill. I have to spend about a week in bed when I return home. Can you please heal me? And I wasn't anticipating that I would be healed, But 3 days later, during the night, I woke up and I had a tremendous amount of pain in my body. And I woke my husband up and I said, I don't know what's happening. You might have to call an ambulance or you might have to take me to the hospital. And he said, well, give it a few minutes and let me know if you need an ambulance. And so while I was waiting, all of a sudden, I found myself in a new location. I was in a misty place. I was lying on a table. There were tall, glowing entities standing next to my head. I could see them in my peripheral vision. And I was wondering what was going on. And so when I thought this, they either showed me a screen or a vision, and I still don't know what it was, but I could see the outline of my body. And I had sort of like little bots going through the periphery of my body.
Bots as in
And
robots?
like little energy, something of energy.
Okay.
And there was just motion there. And then two of my internal organs were colored, one in pink and one in mint green. I was still experiencing that severe pain. But after that, I was waking up in the morning. And I knew that this wasn't a dream because my husband still remembers it to this day. It was profound. And I felt like I was 23 years old again. I was completely healed, and I haven't had a relapse since 2012.
Pretty amazing.
It
So,
was.
what keeps coming to my mind is we interpret things according to our framework, our frame of life, of reality.
Mhm.
And we do that differently at different ages in our human development. In other words, this could easily be some of the reports in the Bible, and I'm sure that's been
Mhm.
mentioned. This could easily be some of the shamanic experiences. This could easily be any number of things. Are we interpreting these experiences that we're having with other entities as ETs because that's the framework that we have in modern times?
Well, I think that initially I did believe that they were extraterrestrials. Now I'm not certain.
Mhm.
And there is an overlap. We have this overlay between the paranormal and shamanic studies, and I use the quantum healing hypnosis technique, and can channel energy through my crown chakra and out through my arms, sort of like Reiki uh,
Mhm.
on people, and people are healed. And so, it, I don't know if this is divine. I don't know if, this is a multidimensional universal energy. I don't know what it is today, and I don't know if I ever will. But I'm studying all of this, and I'm still looking for answers.
And that's a good thing because it's amazing how much more is out there than what we can perceive with our senses, and how when we do contact it, we can only interpret it according to our current reality. So it's pretty fascinating. What are we really dealing with here that we've been calling ETs and abduction all along, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to take a commercial break here in just a little bit. But I would like to get into it. Seems like you have totally changed directions recently on your life's path. And like you said before, you were a nuts and bolts researcher, and things have changed for you. So if you don't mind, on the other side of this commercial break, I would really love to get into that.
Okay.
All right. Please stay with us as Kathleen and I continue to explore the transformative impact of contact with non human entities. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
Beautiful Mind coffee is delicious coffee your brain will love. Made with ethically sourced 100% Arabica coffee grown in the volcanic soil of the Tolima, Colombia region, Beautiful Mind coffee is roasted and ground in small batches to ensure each bag contains a wonderful full-bodied artisan coffee. Beautiful Mind coffee contains herbal ingredients to aid in boosting your daily mental clarity and focus. Maca root powder, green tea extract and American ginseng have all been selected for their ability to support good brain health. Taking care of your brain's health now can help delay or prevent the onset of cognitive dysfunction, including dementia, Alzheimer's, and more general memory loss as you get older just by enjoying the delicious flavor of our roasted coffee and herbal ingredients found exclusively in Beautiful Mind coffee. For more information on Beautiful Mind coffee, visit us online at www.beautifulmindcoffee.ca. Beautiful Mind coffee is now available at amazon.ca.
Welcome back. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. This hour, our expert guest is Kathleen. Kathleen, we were about to get into what changed your direction, why you changed direction. And so if you wouldn't mind telling us about your 2020 life-changing event.
Yes, it really was startling. I was talking on the telephone to a man named Chris Bledsoe, who is a confirmed experiencer, and I was working on an investigation of an event that happened at his home in North Carolina, where he and two women were taken to craft. And Chris calls in orbs. Chris has also had Marian apparitions.
Okay, I'm sorry. You're going to have to back up for those of us that don't know what calling in an orb is, or what is that?
Okay, well, these orbs are seen with the naked eye. They will glisten. They appear to contain non-human consciousness. They can, and Chris can communicate with these orbs. Many experiencers see them in their homes as well. And now Marian apparition is oftentimes equated with the Mother Virgin Mary. But with Chris, this is a woman with long blonde hair. She's wearing a long robe. Her arms are outstretched. She's very kind and beautiful, and she is floating above the ground. She's not standing on the ground, and she is giving Chris prophecy. So something else about Chris is that he was living on property where there was a tree that was smoking all the time. And he discovered that he could place a photograph and an article of clothing from a person who, for example, was suffering from stage 4 ovarian cancer, and that this person would be healed miraculously.
So do they have scientific studies on that has proven the effectiveness of it?
Yes. Jim Summervin from the CIA worked on this investigation, and Dr. and Colonel John Alexander also worked on it. There have been many investigators who have worked on this, and the government is interested in it.
Now, I was meaning like medical research. There have been any medical research or studies done on it?
Okay, I'm not sure if Chris has had medical researchers. I know that there's been a lot of scientific interest in his case.
I would think, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Yeah. So as I was talking with Chris, and I was using my cell phone, I wasn't holding it. There was no thunderstorm or lightning outside. But he was calling in an orb, and he was in such awe and speaking so gently. And all of a sudden, I had what I could only call a light being appear in my office. And it was kind of triangular, but it didn't have sharp lines. But I felt something, it was very holy coming from this. It was just kind of being in the presence of the divine. And it dropped to my knees in prayer. And I've never had that kind of experience in my entire life. And, so I had to look at all of this differently. So it seems that over time, I'm receiving tidbits of information that are kind of dropped on me from the universe to help me with my discoveries.
So what's your religious upbringing?
I was raised in 3 different religions. First, I went to the Baptist church because it was in walking distance to my house, and I was I helped with the Sunday school. And then I was christened Catholic, and sometimes when I went to the city where my grandmother lived, I would go to the Catholic church. My mother was called a home Baptist. She didn't go to church. And my great-grandfather had built a church next to the family home, and so that my great-grandmother didn't have to take the horse and buggy all the way to Kingston Plain, which was about 5 miles away, to go to church. And so that church was purchased by the Episcopal church.
Well, the reason I ask is, do you think that your again, it travels in genetic lines, okay, as does religious upbringing. Do you think that your interpretation and your experience was dictated by your upbringing?
Well, certainly anyone's upbringing comes into it. The set of experiences that we've had in our lives are indelibly there. And even if we have not been churchgoers in our adult life, you still have that kind of overlay, I think, that comes in to our interpretations.
Yeah, a filter, if you will. So it sounds to me like you've made a 180-degree turn from being a nuts and bolts researcher to someone that's really looking more for spiritual answers to extraterrestrials. Is that accurate?
I would say yes. I'm still interested in the extraterrestrial part of that and how it relates to them and all of this. But I'm more interested, I would say right now, in the study of consciousness and what we can learn from that.
Because it is our consciousness that's interpreting whatever experience we're having and coloring whatever experience we're having, yes?
Yes, absolutely.
How do you feel that our consciousness is changing at this time in history? Or do you feel it is?
I think that experiencers, especially, are becoming more aware of the purpose of our contact or abductions. It's not happening as much as it did. In fact, I haven't been taken since 2015, but I've had more direct contact.
Is it that you haven't been taken, or is it that you're interpreting it differently?
I'm not interpreting it differently. I'm wide awake and in my office sometimes when this happens, and it's during the daytime. So I'm not interpreting it differently.
I don't understand the difference. I mean, if you're wide awake and you're having an experience, you still have to interpret it, right?
Well, yes, but the information that they give me pertains to my experience throughout my life, my contact with them, Why have they taken me? How many generations back has this gone? What their purpose is in being here. Those of us who are experiencers have the commonalities that we become more intuitive or psychic. We become empaths. Those are a couple of the things. We can have telepathic communication. So, and we become more spiritually oriented. Nearly 100% become more spiritually oriented in our MUFON study.
Do you think that people are genetically predisposed to being more of all of those things, and then it's triggered by some event?
That could be. I'm not certain, because those are things that near-death experiencers have in common with experiences of contact. So, there's a lot of amorphous area there, but they're all good things to think about. We just don't have the answer for that.
Isn't that, the hallmark of this whole study, this whole hour that we've had together as well, is that we don't know. We just flat don't know. There's something going on, but we don't know what it is.
Absolutely. That is true. And I think that it's extraordinarily important to look for the answers.
I would agree. Absolutely agree. Kathleen, we've reached the time in the show where I have to ask you, what is your mission?
Oh my gosh. I think that my present mission is to help the ETs in raising spiritual awareness. They told me that their biggest concern is that our technological development is out of sync with our spiritual growth. And that when this happens, there can be an imbalance that leads to disaster. And the way we need to raise human consciousness is by becoming more loving people. So I encourage people to send love into the collective consciousness. Our scientific studies have indicated that by projecting our loving consciousness, we can make change. And so that is my message to people today.
Lovely message. So when I started with a question at the very beginning of the show. What is the purpose of what we call alien abduction or entity contact? What is the purpose?
Well, there are many reasons for this, and it depends upon the race of the entities, the types of entities involved. Many of them work together, others don't. And anything from the biological experiments, they were very interested in toxins in my body. They took me time and time again to test for environmental toxicity. They're very concerned about our use of nuclear weapons and the impact that nuclear detonation has on not only our world and our survival, but also they say that it tears into the fabric of time and space, into across the dimensions, and causes damage in other dimensions. So those are the essential messages that they have for us. And that is their reason for wanting us to change.
If a person feels that they are being contacted, how can they tell if it's the good, the bad, or the ugly?
It depends on what they can remember about it. And they will know when they can remember what entities they've been contacted by and how they've been treated.
Don't the bad try to trick? I mean, the trickster has been among us always.
Yes, there are negative types that attach to people who are extraordinarily fearful, and they can make people ill. I've worked with people who somehow, I'm not sure if this is correct, but it appears that a portal has been opened. There are UFOs, there are non-human entities, there are also negative entity attachments, there are angelic beings, there are entities or prehistoric animals sometimes observed as well.
Man.
It's, it's a
We
crazy thing.
we could go on, but unfortunately, we are out of time. Kathleen, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Our guest this hour has been Kathleen Marden, award-winning UFO contact researcher and author of 6 books, her latest, Forbidden Knowledge. And we're leaving this show with not much knowledge. We don't understand what we don't understand. We'll continue to look for you. Stay tuned to this channel, and we'll have more information coming. This has been Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.